Hey guys, so before you come to this, you need to make sure that you've completed your bell ringer for the day in Google Classroom. Once you've completed your bell ringer, you either need to get a sheet of paper out and label it like this if you're in class, or you need to open up your Unit 2 notes document in Google Classroom if you're virtual. So what we're going to be talking about today is ways you get information. So I want you to take a second and think, what are some ways we get information about what is going on in the world? Well, you may have said the news, TV, the internet, Google, social media, TikTok, however you get information. Anything that you get information from is a source. So there are two types of sources, primary sources and secondary sources. So again, a source is something that you get information from. All sources are either primary or secondary, and it's important to be able to tell the difference between the two. So let's talk about primary sources first. Primary sources are original records from the past that were recorded by people who were involved in the event or witnessed the event. So again, this has a dot beside it, so make sure that you write it down. Primary sources are original records from the past that were recorded by people who were involved in the event or witnessed the event. You need to write all of this down. Let's see. All of this down. Alright guys, if you need more time on this note, make sure you just pause the video. So primary sources don't have to be what you usually think about, like a journal, something written down. Primary sources can also be objects or artifacts or visual evidence. So primary sources are good because they give people an idea about what people in the past saw or thought about an event. It helps people know how others felt about the event. That's what primary sources will help you do when you're conducting research. So some examples of primary sources you may have thought about: books, newspapers, magazines, diaries, records, and letters. However, sculptures, paintings, and drawings can also be primary sources. Another example of a primary source you may not have thought of is like an arrowhead. So an arrowhead is an artifact, or an object, but you can learn something from it. It's a source of information. It's a primary source. You can learn that they use this to hunt with. That's a primary source. So some more examples of primary sources. This newspaper article from 1963 when JFK was assassinated, so John F. Kennedy. Letters from the past. People wrote those letters. They were at those events. That is a primary source. And right here, this is this is cuneiform on clay tablets. So this is an ancient writing. Before people wrote on paper, they would write on these clay tablets. Primary sources. So we talked about primary sources. The other type of source is called a secondary source. Secondary sources are accounts of past events created after the event has occurred by someone who was not there. So this was created after the fact, and the person who created it was not involved in the event. They did not see the event. They were not there. So a secondary source can be both useful and reliable, but they cannot reflect the thoughts and feelings of the people who experience the event. So a primary source is really good because it can explain how the people who lived through that event felt, while a secondary source cannot. Let me go back. Again, make sure that you wrote this down, guys. It's got a dot beside it. A bullet point means you should write it down. So it happened after the fact, and the person who was not there. Some examples of secondary sources. Textbooks, articles written by people who were not actually at the event, biographies. So a biography is when somebody writes about somebody else's life. So if I wrote about Oprah Winfrey, that's a biography. An autobiography is when you write about your own life. So biography is when you write about somebody else's life. You were not there. You did not live their life. That's a secondary source. Some other examples of secondary sources can be images, graphs, and charts, but they are only considered secondary sources if they were created by uninvolved parties after the event occurred. Some more examples of secondary sources. A textbook is a secondary source. An encyclopedia is a secondary source. This biography of Abraham Lincoln by James McPherson. Guys, because this is someone writing about somebody else's life, that is a secondary source. So primary sources are original documents from the past. They were recorded by people who were involved in the event or witnessed the event. Secondary sources are written after the fact. They are the person who wrote these secondary sources, or where these sources came from. They were not involved in the event that is being talked about. Primary sources are original. Secondary sources come after the fact. If you need more time on any of those notes, you can rewind and pause the videos where you need more time. Alright guys, so what you need to do today, after you've completed the bell ringer and this video lesson, you need to first work on the primary and secondary sources assignment located in Google Classroom. Then you need to work on the MLK primary and secondary sources assignment in Google Classroom as well. Number 3, complete any unfinished timeline work that you may have started on yesterday. After you have done all of those 3 steps, you need to try to do at least 2 words on your vocab. And if you haven't finished your climate slide still, work on that. Alright, that's it guys. If you need anything else, please message me, or if you have questions, message me on Google Classroom or email me.